up next, former presidential candidate and Congressman Ron Paul, plus the editor of the Huffington Post, Arianna Huffington. You're watching another bi-coastal edition, I guess we're calling it, of Morning Joe, live from New York and from the Fortune Most Powerful Women Summit in Carlsbad, California. We'll be right back.
Here with us now, the co-founder and editor-in-chief of the Huffington Post, Arianna Huffington, joins us. And with us from Washington, Republican representative from Texas and member of the Financial Services and Joint Economic Committees, Congressman Ron Paul. Congressman, thanks very much for joining us. Your thoughts on the president's speech and hope that we actually are going to turn our economic problems around?
Well, at least he was a little bit cautious. He wasn't bragging that it was turned around, and he shouldn't be because we have a long way to go. He suggests that the answer will be easy credit to make sure people get some low-interest loans. Without really looking at it, he should realize that we got into this mess because we had easy credit and artificially low-interest loans, and we pushed this on the people, caused all the malinvestment and the bubble to form. So you can hardly solve the problem of a bursting bubble with trying to reinflate and create a new bubble. We've gotten away with it now for several decades, but it's not going to happen this time.
Okay, but how do we not recreate a new bubble? How do we not find ourselves in this situation?
Let's just stop right here. No, I can't. But I can read lips. And, you know, Ron, I'm having a problem with my IFB, but I actually lifted a speech that you made in the Banking Committee on September 10th, 2003. I remember that date because your words were so dramatic. Ron,
prophetic.
You said, while everybody else was saying, oh, if we don't help people out through these loans of Fannie and Freddie, then we're just horrible people. We hate poor people. You said, and you predicted, you said, if we continue to inflate this bubble this way, the housing crisis is going to cause an explosion and there's going to be damage worldwide. What did you know, Ron Paul, in 2003 that nobody else on the Banking Committee or in the United States Congress or in the media know? What did you know?
Well, I think it reflects an understanding of economics. I didn't know anything special other than the fact that I had studied Austrian economics, and their understanding of the business cycle comes from the Federal Reserve, the creation of credit. And we've been working with Keynesian economics since the Depression. We've had perpetual bubbles and recessions and ups and downs and inflation. And Nixon really sealed it over when he says we're all Keynesians now. And we still are in Washington. They still use Keynesian economics to try to solve these problems. So it isn't all that complex. If you interest rates are very, very important. Prices are very, very important in a free market. And when you distort prices, like when wage and price controls, everything sees up. Nothing can happen. But when a Federal Reserve comes in and fixes the prices of interest rates, you deceive the savers and the spenders and the investors. People believe that there's been a lot of savings and interest rates are very low. And that wasn't the case. We weren't saving a penny. We were giving low interest rates because we were creating money out of thin air, and that's why I keep coming back to the Federal Reserve. It was the policies of the Federal Reserve that created this, and we shouldn't have been surprised at all that we eventually had this tremendous financial crisis.
So, Congressman, is your solution then to get rid of the Federal Reserve then? I mean, or what else are you proposing we do here to make sure this kind of stuff doesn't happen again?
Well, first off, we ought to obey the Constitution, live within our means, and balance the budget, quit warmongering, and quit the welfare state. Those minor things like that. But eventually, you don't need the Federal Reserve. No, it's caused too much trouble. Central banking has always been harmful. It's a seductive way of financing big government. Conservatives love it because you can pay the military bills. Liberals love it because you can pay the welfare state bill. But it's all deception. It's all a tax. It eventually destroys and hurts the very people you're trying to help. You try to help poor people by giving them stuff for free, but you end up giving them inflation. They're the first ones to lose their jobs. They're the ones who suffer the most from inflation. We have inflation today much more so than anybody admits because that's why the cost of medicine is so high and the cost of education is so high. It's the devaluation of the dollar. So with all this good intentions of helping poor people, the very people who are doing this are actually making it much more harmful and hurting those they want to help.
Arianna, let's talk about September 15th today. You have been writing in the Huffington Post for some time about the fact that this administration and the last administration couldn't stand up to Wall Street, couldn't pass the tough regulations that need to be passed. You still think that's the case? And out here, Andy was just saying, you took on Larry Summers.
Well, yesterday when Larry Summers spoke, I asked him whether he really believed that they would have fundamental reform of Wall Street. Because they've been saying that ever since the administration took office. And the truth is that they're all like the captain of a ship telling us we're going to go in this new direction. But the autopilot in the boiler room is set in a different direction than the one they want to take us.
The same direction.
The same direction that we are going now.
Yeah.
And the autopilot is really controlled by the lobbyists in Washington. You know, thousands of lobbyists spending literally tens of millions of dollars undermining reform efforts. Remember what happened? This is critical to the Cram-Down Amendment. And I'd love to ask Congressman Paul about that. The Cram-Down Amendment was critical to the foreclosure reform efforts, because without that, without being able to modify your mortgages, nothing is going to work. So now we're having thousands of foreclosures every day, which is affecting the whole community. These are not just people who took crazy subprime loans. These are people who are losing their homes because they lost their jobs. There was a moving article in the New York Times about over 1 million school children are going to school right now homeless. This is having a huge impact, not just on this generation, but on the next one. And the administration is still more concerned with saving Citigroup and saving the big banks, the big 5 banks that are now much bigger than they were a year ago.
And you know the thing, and you started to bring it up, and it's a question, Ron, that I keep raising on this show. Why is it that the same people, and I know, Ariana, you'll agree with me, the same people that got us in this mess, whether you're talking about Tim Geithner, that was at the wheel of that ship for a very long time, or whether you're talking about Larry Summers, that was in part of some things that happened in 98 and 99, or whether you're talking about Hank Paulson that was pushing for 40-to-1 leverage rates. Why is it that these same people that got us in trouble are the same people that are still running this economy?
Well, they're in charge and they have the power and they still believe it. I mean, they're believers in Keynesian economics, but they're the ones who caused the trouble. Look, the president wants to give more power, to the Federal Reserve. And if you come anywhere close to my understanding of the Federal Reserve, that's the last thing. I want to get rid of the Federal Reserve, and here he wants to enhance it. But I think they're locked in. Whether they're Republicans or Democrats, they're going to support the corporations. Even in medical care reform, who do you think is going to come out well on this? Corporations, drug companies, and insurance companies, they're being protected. Some conservatives accuse Obama of wanting socialized medicine. I don't think so. I think he wants to perpetuate corporatism, whether it's in the financial markets or whether it's in medical care or whatever. So I just think that the difficulty is the transition. How do you go from where we need to go without hurting people? And quite frankly, you can't do it. People are going to be hurt one way or the other. I just want to minimize the pain, and I just don't want to put the pain on the taxpayer.
You would agree with Ron Paul in that corporations are getting, you believe, a free ride off of this administration as well as the last.
Well, I would also agree with Congressman Paul that this is not capitalism. This is not free enterprise capitalism.
This is not capitalism at all.
This is definitely not capitalism. This is really oligopoly.
Yeah.
And that's why we have, 92 smaller regional banks that have failed. 92 banks. But the 5 big banks are bigger than ever. Their profits are growing. Their toxic assets are still on the books. That's what I want us to discuss. Congressman Paul, how come a year later, after the bailout, which was supposed to get rid of the toxic assets are still there and still a potential time bomb for another economic meltdown?
And Ron, we're up against a hard break, so give us a 30-second answer.
Well, because they haven't solved the problem. Some of the toxic assets are now owned by the taxpayers. That's one thing. But this is my argument. They won't get rid of them. You have to liquidate it. You should allow the correction to occur in 1 year and get all those bad assets out of the way. The fact that they're propping them up means that we're working very hard to perpetuate this problem and turn it into the second Great Depression, if it's not as bad, but much worse if we continue to do what we're doing by not allowing those toxic assets to be liquidated.
Absolutely right. Congressman Ron
He was
Paul,
right before.
We're going to continue this
Dead
conversation on the radio. You'll be our guest. It's 10 a.m. to noon Eastern Time on WABCRadio.com. Congressman Ron Paul.
Thank you.
The book is called The End of the Fed. Thank you so much
Thanks,
for being
Ron.
our guest on Morning Joe. We'll talk to you on the radio.